Thanks for joining us. My name is Brian Elaine. I'm here today with Wajahat Ali. Wajahat is a columnist at the Daily Beast and senior fellow at the Western State Center and Auburn Seminary. He's a public speaker, recovering attorney, and tired dad of three cute kids. In 2022, he released his first book, Go Back to Where You Came From, and other helpful recommendations on how to become American. He believes in sharing stories that are by us for everyone. Universal narratives told through a culturally specific lens to entertain, educate, and bridge the global divides. He frequently appears on television and podcasts for his brilliant, incisive, and witty political commentary. This is true. Born in the Bay Area of California of Pakistani immigrant parents, Waj went to school wearing husky pants and knowing only 3 words of English. He graduated from UC Berkeley with an English major and became a licensed attorney. He knows what it feels like to be the token minority in the classroom and the darkest person in a boardroom. Like Spider-Man, he's often had the power and responsibility of being the cultural ambassador of an entire group of people, those who are often marginalized, silenced, or reduced to stereotypes. His essays, interviews, and reporting have appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, The Guardian, and New York Review of Books. He's spoken at many organizations from Google to Walmart to Princeton University to the United Nations. I should also say that Waj spoke this past summer at the Chautauqua Institute and gave a fantastic talk. So I encourage everyone to watch that online at the CHQ Assembly. And you can learn more about Waj and all of his work at Wajali, WAJALI.com. So welcome, Waj, and congratulations on all of your wonderful work.
Oh, thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate it. And thank you for that amazing introduction. I just want to let everyone know I did not write that. I think that was my publicist. So I'm not that obnoxious.
Well, as I mentioned to you earlier, I've followed you for quite a while and really appreciate your frankness. And, you're a voice that I think needs to be heard more and more broadly. So I hope that's the case. I usually start by asking others to speak more about their background, but, that's what your book is about. So let me just ask this. What else would you like people to know about you?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think for the purposes of this conversation and what you and I were talking about right before you hit record, I told you that I'm actually a lot more religious and spiritual than people realize, and that animates a lot of what I do. And instead of that transforming me into kind of a reactionary, terrified, xenophobic person who wants to live in a cocoon in 1952, it has instead inspired me to try to stretch and expand this protective tent, right, to include more people. And it's one of the situations that if you are motivated in more than a superficial way by religion, right, and let's just call it organized religion, in many of these circles, you are kind of like a freak, an anathema. They're like, look at you kind of strange. You're like, what? It's 21st century. You're an intelligent, worldly person. You went to college. Why do you believe in this? And then also, I always joke that when it comes to especially Muslims, but I think anyone who's religious, America, it's so interesting. America is a way more religious country than most secular countries, and yet we do not have a sophisticated language to understand religion or speak about religion. There's only like, if you look at New York Times, Washington Post, there's only like 1 or 2 religion writers, which is always shocking, and I know them. But it's one of those things where the people think, oh, you're religious. So they look at us either as we're carnivores or vegans. And I'm like, most people are omnivores. There's like, they kind of believe and they kind of do a ritual, but it's like either you're super fundamentalist, hardcore, theocratic authoritarian, or you're like the good secular, like barely religious type of person. And I'm like, you're missing out on in the huge middle. And I feel like if people kind of understood the huge middle, they would be able to reach a lot of these folks, speak that language, and better understand a lot of cultures and folks around the world, not just Christians and Jews and Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists, but like, if you travel, and I've been lucky enough to travel, and you and I have been very lucky men, just having a cultural and emotional IQ helps you with your engagement with folks. And because the only color that ultimately matters is the color green, it helps you in business. It gets you more business. So it's one of those situations where I'm trying to make a pitch here to think beyond these simple constructs that often lock all of us in. And as a person who is the son of, Pakistani immigrants, brown-skinned, Muslim, and has this name, Wajahat Ali, that my parents gave me to fit in naturally. You can imagine, it's kind of it's always been an uphill battle or a struggle, a challenge. Let's call it a challenge to create new language and modes of understanding when people come at you and try to put you in a box.
Well, you talked about the big middle, right? And the struggle with language that fits. And I think, with the polarization we've experienced over the last, 6 or 7 years at least, it made that whole process more difficult.
Yeah, I mean it's been going on longer than that, right? If you take it really back, if let's just stick with America, it's the Southern strategy that was employed by Republicans and really kind of really put on steroids by Richard Nixon, that said, oh, well, now you got desegregated schools. So instead of seeing our commonality and seeing black and brown and white workers and uniting them because, most of their problems and challenges are shared, let's try to divide each other along race. That was a deliberate strategy placed by Goldwater. Goldwater lost. Nixon did it. Reagan, George W. Bush took it over, right? And then Trump comes, and I would say right-wing media also. People oftentimes just say the Republicans, but I'd say right-wing media is very critical to this, right?
Yes.
Grievance politics, xenophobia, race, your America is no longer your America, right? So pitting in particular white Christian men and women against the rest. And then you peel off some black, brown, Asian folks, right? You say, you're the model minority. You're the good ones. Why can't the rest of them be like you, right? And so this type of polarization is a type of very deliberate demonization, mixed in with conspiracy theory and lies that says it's us versus them, especially along racial divides, right? And also then religious divides. There's one America. There should be one hero of America. And you, the traditional hero of America, are being threatened and replaced by them. And, people might sometimes think, oh, Americans who believe in this, they have horns on their head and they're evil. They're just people. They don't have horns on their head. They don't, have forked tongues. But enough data has revealed, and I know, Brian, I know you know folks like this, that if you live in that cocoon and you get hit with these messages and you get hit with these lies again and again and again, you become radicalized. That's it shapes your worldview and it makes you seem like you live on Earth 3 while the rest of us are like, hey, come back to reality. And that's this type of deliberate polarization that I think is done for profit, done for politics, which has corrupted and radicalized otherwise good folks in the middle, right? Has made them terrified. And makes them believe that they're living the American nightmare. And then you and me are the ones trying to take away their dream. Whereas we're like, no, no, no. We just want a speaking part. We don't want to take away your spotlight. We just want a role. And I think the more that we can try to convince as many of those people that, hey, this country is big enough and the world and life is big enough to accommodate the rest of us, then there's some hope. But it's a dangerous situation, Brian, because the type of polarization that we've seen, thanks to, I think, in particular media and politics, is something that I've never witnessed in my life. And now the fact that everything's fractured, and you and I are old enough that we remember there used to be water cooler conversation. There used to be something on TV, and the next day we'd be able to talk about it and debate it. But now people live in their own little isolated cocoons with their own algorithms and their own facts. And that's something that's really unique that I think you and I, our generation, has never really had to grapple with before. That's what's dangerous.
Yeah, well, this whole us versus them, obviously something that I've been, thinking about a lot myself, and it was part of the reason for the whole How to Heal Our Divides effort. I mean, so that always begs the question, okay, what do we do about it? Right? I mean, for me, there's a very fundamental aspect of this that has to do with greed for power.
Yeah.
And a lack of trust, that the polarization has led to, neither side, quote unquote, trusting each other. Just the level of trust, it seems to have gone down tremendously. So I don't know what thoughts you have about how do we reestablish trust and how do we get ourselves away from the power of greed?
Well, the last one, The Power of Greed, I'm just randomly thinking about this 2 days ago. I mean, it's just human nature, right? There's a reason why Lord
Yeah.
of the Rings is still relevant. There's a reason why if you read the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, listen to Buddhist scholars, Hindu texts, Aesop's fables. It's like human nature really hasn't changed. At the end of the day, you look at it, there's always a Pharaoh and there's always a Moses type, right? There's always an oppressor and an oppressed. There's the rich and the poor. And it's like, when human beings get money and wealth, what do they want? More money and wealth. Um, so the to answer the last part first, that's like how will you combat human greed and avarice? Get rid of humans, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. It's one of the situations where if we want to bring it full circle, it's that spiritual fight that is something, this thirst for materialism that I think infects all of us, regardless of your politics or your gender or your political leanings, right? Like to work actively against that. And this is where I was thinking about, just to myself, I was like, the benefit, if any of benefit there is to follow the spiritual path, you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to be religious. I understand why people are so mistrustful of religion and institutions, because oftentimes these institutions, including religious institutions, have been sources of what? Oppression, right? Sources of pain. They've been used and abused by those in power to go against women, to go against minorities, to go against LGBTQ. So you cannot blame so many folks, young folks in particular, when you try to sell them on religion or capitalism or America. They're like, well, what has this done for me? You're saying these are good ideologies and institutions. The government has just stomped on me. The rich are getting richer. The religious communities have been seen as a hammer and a sword against everyone else. Capitalism has been unfettered by greed. The rich who keep messing up and gave us a horrible economy failed up. And you're telling me that I have to fight for this and believe in this. Why? So that leads to then mistrust, cynicism, this belief in, trust the institutions, but we won't reform the institutions. And young people are like, no, we're done. You have to give them something. You have to model a type of behavior that inspires people to have faith again. And especially when it comes to religion and spirituality, right? I was trying to think about, we look at this wellness industry, which is very amusing to me. This wellness industry is now like a multi-billion-dollar industry. Again, very amusing to me because when you read some of them, the books and like the best-selling books, and you see the YouTube videos, I'm like, oh, so basic Sufism 101. Oh, so what the monks have been doing for thousands of years. That's basically what it is. And so there is like this wisdom that you do not have to believe in God and spirituality, like people on the spiritual path. I don't care if you're a Sufi. I don't care if you're a monk. I don't care if you're a Christian ascetic, that humanity has been doing for thousands of years that have helped them, live more fulfilling, better, healthier lives, that combats materialism and replaces it with something more meaningful. And now we've seen the monetizing of it, and you just repackage it in different words, and people are like, who would have thought that meditating would be, who would have thought that being grateful helps your endorphins? And it also goes back full circle to, if you say it's a religious practice, people tune out because of the lack of trust in institutions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, it's also up to us to be the best versions of ourselves and reform these institutions, even the media, so people then who are easily misled can be like, oh, no, no, no. I have faith in these institutions. These institutions are doing good. And these are the people who are the representatives of these institutions who are creating good role model. I think it's all connected.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I agree with everything you're saying, but I want to get to your book. I mentioned it's go back to where you came from and other helpful recommendations on how to become American. So what motivated you to write the book?
That's a very good question. I signed up with a agent like 9 years ago, 10 years ago, and he just liked, what I was writing, and he said, you owe me a book. And I'm like, I have an idea. And every year for about 10 years, I'm like, I have an idea. I got to do it. And then finally, I think I was 39. It was during the pandemic. And my agent's like, listen, we have this conversation every year. And you seem like you're just stuck. Just write. Who cares about the form? Just write something. Write these stories. And, it takes good things take time. And I could have written this book at the age of 32, but I think I needed the extra mileage. And it was something about the pandemic and almost turning 40, and 40 being kind of the symbolic number. And you're like, 40, I'm becoming an adult. I'm still alive. Oh my God, what have I done? But less desperation and more inspiration. I just felt like, okay, now's the time. And I made a decision to finally sit and write this story that was just, if you will, evolving in my head before my 40th birthday. And then once it came out, I mean, it just came out like a waterfall. Like I finished in like 2.5 months. And yeah, and my publisher and my editor was like, all right, well, come back to me in 6 months. I'm like, no, I'll give it to you in 2.5 months. And she's like, yeah, sure, whatever. You're gonna ask for an extension. And I'm like, here's the first draft. She goes, whoa. And it was one of those situations where I felt like it was the right time in my life, but also what was happening in the United States of America, everything that I was talking about, writing about, and the rest of us were trying to warn about was coming to fruition. And sometimes it takes a while for people to catch up. And I felt like America's ready to have this conversation. They can't just easily dismiss me. So the
Yes.
timing was also right,
Yes.
unfortunately. And it was, I think, right after the murder of George Floyd. And we were having a moment, and I knew it was going to be a very brief moment, maybe a year, before the tides and forces that you and I were talking about, the furious forces who want to take this country back to 1952 would react. And that's what happened. It took a year, and then people are now banning books, as you know, all across America. So I'm like, this is the time. So it came out within that whirlwind of a time right before I turned 40. And, a lot of stuff happened between the ages of 31 and 40 that I thought gave the book more resonance and weight, both on a personal level, but also what was happening in America.
Well, in the book, you describe your background and all these incredible challenges that you had to go through. I mean, pretty intense stuff. Your child's health, your parents' business, challenges. And so, you've been quite resilient, quite frankly, is in my view. But how do you think that those experiences have made you and hopefully made you stronger?
Yes, it's interesting. People say I never see myself as resilient or strong or brave. I just see myself as a guy trying to survive, right?
Yeah.
What other people say resilience is just life. The book, many of these books, many of these American stories are the rags to riches stories, and my book kind of inverts that. It's a riches to rags story, and then not necessarily back again, but trying to find meaning and purpose and strength forward amidst immense challenges. And I think that's why the book probably also resonates more with folks, because if it was the traditional immigrant story, and there's aspects of that in the book, right? So the book starts off, and the book is done with a kind of a tongue-in-cheek self-help guide, speaking about motivational books and the wellness industry. So it's like, how you too can become an American, right? So I'm like, well, how can I discuss what's happening in America and the conversations that we've had, right? About race, about politics, about these divides, but in a way that has a narrative arc to it and can be personal. And so if you read the book has a kind of a different format where people are like, oh, I didn't know it'd be memoirish. And then other people are like, oh, I thought it'd be a traditional memoir, but it isn't. So that's the structure of the book, where I'm kind of your Virgil. I'm your guide through this place called America from a different point of view, right? It's kind of like step in my shoes.
Yeah.
And those shoes initially are, my parents are immigrants. They come here with nothing, but they have an education. They got very lucky. They work hard. They build themselves up. I'm the son of privileged immigrants. And so far, people are like, oh, okay, an American immigrant story. All right, I got it. It's endearing and funny. Oh, okay. His the funny quirks and challenges of being the only brown kid, the only Muslim kid, being a fat kid wearing husky pants. And then there's plot twists. And the plot twist on a macro level is 9/11. And on a micro level, it's my parents getting arrested, like around the same time. And then that's when you see the different side of America, which is part and parcel of America. You see the American nightmare. So it's about the American dream and the American nightmare, and trying to love and fight for a country that doesn't always love you back based on your ethnicity or gender and skin color. And then hopefully trying to chart a vision and path forward for not just me, but also then my children, the next generation. So that's the story, but hopefully done in a very fast-paced, funny, and engaging way.
It really was. I mean, I'm not just saying that because you're here. I mean, it's very entertaining, just like your talk that, we talked about at Chautauqua. You really got a skill in that regard, which is,
I mean, that was and that was 1 week before the horrific incident with Salman Rushdie. We were right across from there. I mean, wild.
Yes. So I realize this next question is one of those that's asking you to be the ambassador for a large group of other people.
Sure.
But I'm going to ask you anyway. Most Americans have a very limited view of Muslims. And much of what we hear isn't positive. What advice do you have for us to learn more?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Look, there is 1.7 billion Muslims around the world. It's the second largest religion when it comes to practitioners. In America, there's anywhere from, they say, from like 4 to 7 million. So it's about like 1% of the population. This is the thing. Stop looking at Muslims as foreign. I guarantee you, you have taken an Uber ride with a Muslim. I guarantee you have worked with a Muslim. I guarantee you your kids are being taught by Muslims. The people who, I guarantee you even had posters of Muslims on your wall. Muhammad Ali was chosen by the United States of America to represent this country in the 96 Olympics. That's pretty profound. A black Muslim man was chosen to hold the torch. And, if you took the DeLorean to the 60s, Muhammad Ali was hated. MLK was hated, even though he's not Muslim. I'm just giving an example of the people who we now revere. They were originally just loathed. It's one of those situations where Muslims were here in the beginning. About a third of the slave trade that was brought over here forcibly against its will, black folks were Muslim. And so if you really think about it, like the Muslim sweat, labor, tears, pain, and joy have helped fertilize this country alongside everyone else. But the reason why that's so important is when people know Muslims, but they hear Muslim, their mind doesn't go to me or Muhammad Ali. It goes to Saddam Hussein, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Osama. And that's the power of the narrative and the story, right? What happened after 9/11 is Muslim became the enemy. Islam became the civilizational threat. And the story of 1.7 billion people and the story of like this really, like the most diverse religious communities in America are Muslims in terms of just makeup and ethnicity. Like no one comes close. But our entire story got smushed into Al-Qaeda, ISIS, terrorism, extremism. Even my friends, like, they're like, oh yeah, you're a Muslim. We forgot. Yeah, but you're one of the good ones. And I'm like, oh, because when they said Muslim, their brain goes to what? Yeah. Osama.
Yeah.
And so you get flattened completely and you get lumped in with this extremist anti-American force, us versus them. And then you have to spend the rest of your life proving your moderation. And I call it in the book, it's like the condemnathon. You have to condemn violent acts done by violent people you've never met. And just to give an analogy, suppose you're a white Christian person who's done everything right, and a white Christian extremist, a white Christian supremacist. And by the way, the number one terror threat in America are white supremacist terrorism. That's for the last few years, but we don't talk about it. But suppose anytime that happened, you have to now represent all your people, come out, do a press conference, apologize. There's hearings, there's investigations. You're asked to fight these crazy white people that you've never met before. You're like, yo, just because I'm white, I don't know these crazy nuts, right? You are blamed. There's hazing. There's discrimination. You get fired. You get beat up. And then your churches have these crawlers in them, FBI crawlers, who are pretending to be Christian. And you have surveillance. And you get knocks on the door from the FBI. What I just described is the lived reality of what happened to Muslims right after 9/11, but that people didn't know or forgot. And what's so interesting about the book is I have a chapter on this, is what's common to you necessarily isn't common to most folks, Brian. It was like a chapter that I've written about the post 9/11 experience so much that I'm like, I have to write this chapter. So I will. Let me try to make it interesting. And I thought people would just got to roll their eyes. But so many folks who aren't Muslim, that was one of the chapters where they're like, I had no idea. Wow, that was so revealing. Huh? Because we're like 20 years,
we forgot. We're
like 20 years removed from 9/11.
Yeah.
So we can have this conversation and people are like, wow, this country actually went mad. We didn't know that's what we did. Not just to Muslims, but to anyone who looked Muslimy. The last thing I'll say is, the first hate crime after 9/11 was a Sikh man in Arizona.
Yeah.
And that's what hate does to you. It flans you. So the Sikh Indian immigrant minding his own business, a gas station owner in Arizona, got killed because 19 foreign hijackers brought down the two towers in New York. That's the cost of hate.
But again, I go back to my original question. It's like, what do we do about it? I mean, what can those of us that are less familiar with Muslim?
Oh yeah, you asked me a simple question. I went on this monologue, a TED speech. It's one of those things where knowledge. Okay, this is what I would say very quickly, because you asked me a simple question. Pardon me that I did give you a TED talk. Three steps. This is what I tell folks. First of all, I understand that we're overwhelmed. People are exhausted. And then when you're overwhelmed and you're exhausted with so many challenges, there's still a pandemic, there's climate change, now there's monkeypox, income inequality, education, debt, right? I could pile it on. Like, people are tap out. Even wealthy people, even people with privilege, they're like, you know what I'll do? I'll take care of myself and my family and my kids. I'll get as much money as I can. I'll put my stake in the ground, and this small little piece of land will be my own, and then I'll die. And as long as I protect my family, and that's enough. So you tap out. I get it. And then other people say, Waj, I care, but who am I? I'm nobody. I can't write for the New York Times like you, or get on CNN or MSNBC and write a book. And I always tell people, I love nobodies. I am, in fact, a nobody. I sincerely believe, and I mean this, Brian, God, fate, universe, Kismet, whatever you believe in, has given everyone something. Everyone's got something. Even the skunk has a superpower of the smell, right? Like, everyone has something that they can do, right, to make a positive impact. And so the three things I recommend everyone doing is, first and foremost, have hope. And if you can't have hope, have faith in something, in someone, right? Have hope or have faith that even though the story is bleak, maybe the page will turn and bring with it a plot twist. So you got to have hope or faith just to get up in the morning, right? It's tough for a lot of people. It's tough. If I can convince you to invest in hope or have faith in something, then I would ask you to do three things. Number one, choose. These are choices to make. Choose to be aware. Be aware of what's happening in your local community or even your family. What's happening? What are the problems? What are the challenges? Awareness is a choice. Being ignorant is also a choice. I would ask you to choose to be aware, okay? Now that you're aware and you've done a little bit of research, you're like, what's happening in my home? Well, why are my children not talking to me? Let me investigate. What's happening in my schools? How come they're picking on these kids? Second thing I will do is make an intention. Making an intention and declaring an intention is very powerful. It's like a mission statement, right? I intend to do something, as opposed to being heedless. Heedlessness is a choice. So making an intention is a choice. So awareness, intention, and the last thing I will say is action. Choose to do something with your local footprint, your local behavior, your local actions, where you can, in your behavior, be the America you want this country to become, right? And some people say, I'm only a mom, I'm only a dad. That's enough. I have 3 kids. In your home, if you model a type of behavior, if you model a type of language, that will impact not just your children, but future generations. Like, you will have a profound impact, especially, what they've shown, Brian, is moms. I know it's still, people might think this is reductive, but moms, unfortunately, based on patriarchy and misogyny, also, like, women get the short end of the stick, but the power of the mother, like educating moms, giving mothers economic opportunities around the world, like the boon that happens, not just to the family, but to the community, the village, is like huge, the return on investment, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're listening as a mom or a dad, the way you change your behavior and your actions in your home will have the type of positive impact. And just think about that. Like, if we just have families changing, you have a block that changes, you have a community that changes, you have people running for school board, city council, village by village. That's what I feel like that gives you autonomy. It empowers you. You feel like you can make a difference. You feel like you're doing something valuable with your time. You don't need to save the universe. But if you could save your own home, that's a huge victory. And that's the type of first step I give people. And when people ask me this, when I get invited to talk in front of corporations, I say the same thing. I'm like, don't worry about the world right now. I mean, go ahead and worry about the world. But if you want to change something, just change your corporation. Change your leadership, change your language, change your behavior, change your culture, right? Recruit more people of color, be more kind, raise wages. You do that and you are positively impacting your community. And think about the positive repercussion that happens. And when people say, oh, wow, I used to work at a place and now I have power and privilege, I have my own company, I'm going to do what they did. And that's the type of ripple effect that really can change and transform lives. And something that I believe is sustainable.
I think that's really excellent advice. I mean, the bad news about this intractable, type of situation we've been in is that I think the grassroots kind of an approach is the only way that ultimately overcome it. It's not a problem that can be solved from above.
It's always been that way, right? Well, let me put it this way. It's the push and pull. Because of my life, DIY, do it yourself, grassroots, nobody believed in me. We put on our play. The institutions mocked us. Journalism, same thing. My broken Ethernet cable, me broke 2008 recession. Even though I'm a lawyer, nobody would hire me, right? It's in the book. I've had a foot in the grassroots and I've had a foot in the institutions. I've been outside the curtains and I've been invited to meet the wizards who live inside the curtains. Everyone has a role to play. There's a push and a pull. So you need the activists, you need the grassroots, you need the volunteers, you need the moms and pops, you need the people inside government, you need the people inside corporations. You need a multicultural coalition of the willing. Everyone has a role to play, right? And people have different roles to play. And so it's one of those situations where you see, when do institutions and power bend? When people make them bend, right? And that's when you get enough people in America that get pissed off, that's when you see the institutions say, oh, well, I guess we'll hire more women. They're not going to do it on their own, Brian. When you get enough
proven time and time again.
Yeah, time and time again, like voting rights, civil rights, women getting the right to vote. George Floyd, millions of people came out, and at least now we're having the conversation, these black folks just aren't complaining. They're actually getting shot and killed by the police. They're on to something. And so that's why I say when people you should not underestimate the power of the people, especially in America. And that's why it's so important that in America, I think it's one of those things hand in hand where those institutions that need to be reformed are counting on people to tap out and be apathetic. Mm-hmm. We have always had the numbers, Brian. Even now, the numbers, if you really just step back and look at the numbers, the majority of people in America, even if it's a small majority, it's still a majority, are trying to push this country towards progress. It's a minority, which thanks to money and power and greed and media and just the way our government is set up, are able to use and abuse their power to push a more, I would say, hateful and restrictive agenda. Mm-hmm. But you've seen that when the people organize and step up, change happens, even now.
So before we finish up, I have to ask you if you've got any future projects, whether they're books or something else that you're able to talk about.
I'm writing for 3 outlets now. I'm writing for Daily Beast, Medium, and MSNBC. I'm, ever since COVID is still around, guys. Please get vaccinated. Please be safe. As of this recording, now we were being hit with like the flu, a new variant, and just a whole bunch of stuff. So you can really help yourself by taking some necessary precautions. But now that people are meeting more in person, like that's when I went to Chautauqua. So I'm giving more talks in person. It's fun, especially in person when you meet people. And then in February or March, I'm going to start writing. Hopefully, I'll write a treatment for my next book, which I think is going to be another nonfiction book. And then I'm going to, if I can finish it and write it and it's good, then I'll go to fiction. And that nonfiction book is, my daughter is a stage 4 cancer survivor. She's now 6. She's cancer-free, knock on wood. But her story, and each time I talk about her, I just seen that it seems to inspire a lot of folks. And I feel like I could take that personal story and make a bigger case for why there should be a communal investment in healthcare and children in America. And I feel like if taking the same type of approach of personal, but at the same time commentary, a kind of 250 page, honest, blunt, ultimately inspirational book about saving Nuseba and how it took a community of strangers who rallied to save this little girl. But not just, talk about my little girl, but if that story can help
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
inspire people to be living donors, to lower the cost of prescription drugs. What's so messed about our system, right? I feel like if that personal story can be beneficial to America, and I think it can. Enough people have told me to write about it, and I was like, nah, nah, I don't know if there's, should I? And I think I'm kind of convinced now that there might be something there. So
I
I'll
think
work
it's a
on that.
great idea. Great idea. Well, my next question is then why do you want to write fiction after that?
This is the thing. Uh, it's interesting. What do they say? Man plans, God laughs, right? When I was a young man, like I'm sure, we had dreams and hopes and aspirations. I've been very lucky compared to the overwhelming majority of people that I've been able to fulfill many of them. Life has taken me on some interesting plot twists. Yeah, most people have to swallow their dreams and just survive, right? But I used to engage in just I had this really kind of wild, fantastic imagination. And I used to write and perform these just absurd stories. And I used to write fiction a lot. And then 9/11 happened and personal challenges happened. And one of the problems of just trying to survive is you're under constant stress and duress. You're a firefighter at all times. And I think what that does is it kind of sometimes short circuits your capacity to imagine and dream and hope and be silly and absurd. And so for 20 years, it's been like fight, flight, and then, being the Muslim representative, then being the person of color representative, and then, you're fighting like real life fires. And then you sit there and go, I used to just like do sketch comedy and come up with plays and like write absurd stories just for fun. I wonder if there's still something left. And at this
Interesting.
stage of my life in my
Interesting.
40s, I'm like, is there, I don't know. So I'm like, I just, maybe I could take a little bit of time and see if there's a spark left. So that's the future hope. I don't know. You have more mileage than me. You have wisdom. You've been through this. You know how it goes.
Well, but I've been a nonfiction, engineering businessman type. I don't have a creative side to me like you do. So I think that,
I mean, you're doing this. This is creative.
well, sort of, but I rely mostly on smart people like you that write really cool books, and then I interview them. That's my business model, so to speak.
Hey man, I do the same. I think I really enjoy, and I think I've been lucky to do in my life. Another part of my career is hosting and interviewing. But I feel like, if you talk to the right conversation partner, it could be very illuminating. And
Absolutely.
and a host's job is to ask the right questions, know when to jump in, know when to jump out. So it's like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. Even though Jerry Lewis got a lot of the spotlight, Jerry Lewis could not have succeeded without Dean Martin being the straight man.
I've never heard that analogy so recently, so I'll
So I
remember
just called you Dean Martin. So congratulations.
that. Well, Wise, thanks so much for joining us. It's really great to speak with you, and really appreciate all the work that you're doing. Thanks so much for the book, and wish you all the best with future endeavors.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for everything that you're doing, and I appreciate talking to you. I'm glad we were able to reconnect.
Yes. So again, the name of the book is Go Back to Where You Came From and other helpful recommendations on how to become American. And go to Waj Ali, WAJALI.com. Waj, thanks again.
Thank you, sir.